Hey, good morning, y'all. So for those who don't know, my name's Anthony, and I have the blessing and the privilege to talk to you today about something that I'm pretty passionate about. And so Jesus is one of those things, and then the other one is empathy. And so I told Madi earlier if I had a chance to travel the world and this was my job to just talk about empathy and Jesus, I'd be sold. So anyway, what a blessing. For those who don't know anything about me, I'm in the Army. I'm in the Army's Master of Social Work program right now, and so getting paid full-time to get my master's degree, which is great. I paid enough for my undergrad, so I'll let them take care of the rest. Let's see, what about me? So I went to Korea for a few years before I joined the Army to teach English to little 5-year-old kids. Best job in the world. I just loved it. And while I was there, I also got a chance to serve in a Korean church for a couple of years. And so I was kind of their jack of all trades of the church. So I would do different worship stuff. I would teach them English. I would preach on several Sundays. So I've got a little bit of background in church leadership, did youth ministry for a couple of years. And so my minor was in theology with a major in psychology. So anyway, I've spent a lot of time thinking about what this looks like. How do you incorporate empathy into the faith-based community, and where does that come from? And so we'll talk about where that's at in Scripture a little bit later on. But I love the concept of empathy being a superpower, and that's because, especially today in our society, I feel as though we are so focused on the screen in our hands that we don't necessarily know how to interact with people on a real relational basis where we can get deep and dig down. And I think that it's something that we all crave. I think we crave to be felt and heard and truly understood, not just be read, right? And I think that's something that hopefully you'll get an understanding of what that looks like today, to be able to be on that reception side of really pouring into somebody and allowing them to see that you care enough to stop, to put your phone down, and to invest into them. So I naturally am a fixer. If there is a problem, I want to solve said problem. And that's being, raised the only boy, and et cetera. And so sometimes that clouds my judgment. That clouds my ability to empathize. So in the next slide, you'll see what I typically do when I am presented with a problem. And it's not actually me, but it is me. And that creates a lot of issues because then I'm not listening to the whole context, right? I hear the problem and I'm like, all right, cool. And I've got all the wheels are racing. Are there any other fixers in the room? Okay, good. So all of us are going to struggle a little bit with empathy, all of those of us who raised our hands, because this is our go-to, right? This is our first response. Okay, cool. What tools do I need, and how am I going to get this done? And usually it's how can I get it done as efficiently as possible, at least for me. All right, 5 seconds, I'm going to solve all of your life problems. And come to find out, in the counseling world, this isn't always the right answer. You need to be able to listen to people. And in order to listen, you have to be able to put yourself in their shoes. And that's kind of where empathy comes from. The next slide shows you a little bit of my superpower. So I do wear a cape, but only when I'm hiking. And my buddies do as well. So that's superpowers in the name of freedom. And so I have, now that Chad sat down, Jake and Chad have microphones. What I want to hear from you all, starting with Jake and Chad, because they both have microphones, is what, if you were to have any superpower, what would it be and why? Any superpower. Absolutely anything. You can make it up. It's never before been heard. Or you can do something lame. It's up to you guys. Go ahead.
I like The Incredibles, so I'm going to be Dash.
Dash. Why?
Because he's fast.
Cool. Right on. Thanks, man.
Yeah.
Chad. He wants to be fast.
I'll stick with your Incredibles theme.
Nice. Yeah, it's a good theme.
But I want to be Violet.
Whoa.
because she has hair. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, I was gonna say my superpower. I think being invisible would be fun. Like turn invisible, and then she can also do like the.
I was thinking chameleon.
Hey, don't take mine.
Hey.
Yeah, I think invisibility. I would. Yeah.
Why would you want to be invisible?
I don't know.
Okay.
I guess I could rob banks and nobody would know it.
Cool.
No,
yeah.
that's terrible.
Don't do that.
Don't do that. I don't know. I mean, have you ever wanted to be like the fly on the wall during conversations? You could totally do that if you were invisible.
It's really hard for me to be a fly on the wall.
But you know what I mean. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I
would
You're
like
kind
that.
of bright in a room.
I'm super bright. Yeah. Not intelligent, but I shine.
Oh, whatever.
Yeah, that's good. Cool. All right. Who else? Superpowers. Raise your hand up high. They'll come and get you. David, come behind you. Coming in hot. There you go.
Healing.
The power of healing. That's a good one. What else? Go ahead.
So Maddox from the X-Men, basically like multiple man, just make an infinite number of myself because there's never enough time to do everything I want/need to do.
Also, the world just needs more of you.
Yes. Well,
Right.
that's obvious.
Okay, yeah. Just in case other people didn't know. Go ahead.
I wish that I could know bad things that are going to happen before they happen.
Bad things that are
So
going
I
to
could
happen before they
stop
happen.
and have the ability to.
Whoa, whoa, whoa.
It's all
Pump
together.
the brakes. Mm-mm. That's two superpowers.
It's all together.
Sorry, that's not how this works. Marty, what do you got?
I wish I could teleport because I spend way too much time in my car.
Ooh,
And I would just snap my fingers and be somewhere. I think that would be awesome.
that would be cool. You'd miss out on the journey, though. I love driving. Go
Eh.
ahead.
I'm gonna go really lame. And
Okay.
my superpower I'd want to have would be Cold War Russia.
One more time.
Cold War Russia
Yeah, that's not a superpower.
was a superpower.
I'm kidding. I don't. Clarify for us. Clarify. No? Okay, or just hand off the mic. That's cool. What else? Anybody else?
Nobody else wants to be a superhero? Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd like to be Supergirl because, you've got the power to do everything. You can fix everything.
You're a fixer. Did you raise your hand? You're okay. All right. Two hands up for the fixer. Okay. Cool. So my superpower is the one that I would like to have is to turn anything that I possibly can into guac. Because guac. Okay. Cool. So next slide. Dude, spoon, finger, like it doesn't matter. Yeah, you just guac. All right, thanks guys, I'll get to you later. So empathy, it's like sympathy, right? Have you guys heard that? Like empathy, it's basically sympathy. No, sympathy is more of a feeling of pity, actually, and you don't have to actually place yourself in that person's position. It's just more of a, I feel bad for you, and the end. And so when you have a desire to truly connect with somebody, to truly understand where they're at, you have to go beyond just sympathy. Sympathy is helpful when it's just a quick surface level conversation, something like that, like I'm really sorry to hear what you're going through, things along those lines. But if you want to dig deep and if you want to do life like Christ, and you want to invest in people the way that Christ invested into people, you have to go deeper than sympathy. How many in here have ever felt connected to a pet? Like a dog, usually a cat, something like that, a pig maybe. So dogs, specifically, when we are feeling sad, have you ever noticed that your dog might come to comfort you? Why is that, right? Because dogs can sense our pain. They can sense our joys. So when we get happy, what do, right? They start wagging their tail and they get their big smiles. I remember one time my mom was crying in the other room, and the dog came from like 3 rooms away just to come in and be next to her and to comfort her. So next slide. I just feel like, right? Like, look at that. Are you kidding me? If I could just look at people like that all the time, I think I'd have a different superpower. But dogs have true empathy, right? They have this ability to just sense when somebody's hurting and to come and just support them. They sense it. They feel it inside of them. With sympathy, you don't feel things. But with empathy, there's this internal movement that's happening where you sense that there's more going on and you're putting yourselves actively in that person's position and you're feeling the things that they're feeling. Sometimes you get so connected to somebody or something, the next slide you'll see when you just almost look the same, right? You just look identical as each other because you're so connected. You're on this different level. And that's the goal. Not this isn't the goal, like don't go for this, but the level of connection that's happening right there, that's the goal. And that's what empathy is. That's the base of it, is to be on that type of level. So the next question is, where does it come from, right? So what is the background of empathy specifically? And so there's a lot of research actually that's been done on empathy, and I won't bore you with all of it, but I do want to give you a little bit of the background to show that what the research has found is that empathy is actually an innate ability, meaning we're born with the ability to empathize with people. But we have to develop that skill as we grow up. So the next slide shows that when we're born, these no, Chad, but I wish, right? So this is my niece and nephew, definitely the cutest children that you'll see all day. So hold on until you get to the next slide. But Tinsley and Maverick. So Maverick, when he was born with the ability to empathize. And they see that in times when a baby cries. What do the other babies do? The other babies will cry. Okay, so they do this thing that they call mirroring, right? So they mirror each other, or they have mimicked behaviors. So when a baby starts to develop its ability to see, they'll start mirroring the movements of mom and dad, and they'll start mimicking the postures and the gestures and things along those lines. That's them investing in you. That's them empathizing with you and trying to connect with you. And so at a very beginning stage in your life, you're already born with this skill set. Now, sometimes things happen in a child's life, and they lose some of these connections. They lose some of these relationships that are so fundamental to developing these skills that they have a harder time developing empathy as they grow up, right? So that shows the importance of that nurturing environment within their home. So right now, Maverick is learning to mimic and to mirror his sister. And she's now coming into the next stage because she's now 3. And on the next slide, you'll see a girl who looks similar to her, just as cute. So this is Brooklyn. And Brooklyn, in this image, she's 3 or 4. And she is now learning that there's more to life than just mirroring and just mimicking. Now she's starting to realize she can now understand that when she looks in a mirror, that's her. And so she can start to recognize self and identify that she is her own person and that everybody else around her is their own people. And so now that she can recognize herself, she needs to start learning how to understand her feelings. She needs to start learning where those things come from, and when she's feeling sad, why she feels that way, and when she feels happy, why she feels that way. Which leads me to say that when we're learning to empathize, we can't learn to empathize with other people until we learn how to process our own emotions, right? Until we can learn how to look inside and see, where am I at right now? Am I in a healthy place? Do I need something? Am I missing something? So that's the stage that she was in right here. And then on the next slide, she's now more developed. She's now 8 or 9 in this image, and she's now learning that the life is more temporary than maybe she once thought, and that there's a such thing as death, there's a such thing as life, and you realize that everything's fragile around you. And with that understanding, you start to recognize the importance of relationships. You start to recognize the importance of connection. And you start to have this desire to attribute meaning to life, meaning to relationships, meanings to emotions. So that's the developmental stage she's at here. Once you start to learn all of these things and you grow through all these stages, then you have the ability to find identity in other people and identity in your friendships and your relationships. This creates full connection. So in the next slide, you'll see this is just, you have the ability to rejoice with people when they rejoice. You have the ability to hurt with people when they hurt. If you've gone through all these stages, all through these phases. this is the goal, right? To be on that level of connectivity. And so that's where it all comes from. That's kind of the background of empathy specifically. So the question then, now that you know where it comes from, is what is it? What is empathy, and how does it play out in the Bible? I told you we're going to look at Scripture. Where does it come from, and what is it? So I've got a few verses here, and we'll go through kind of each one of them and just talk a little bit about what Scripture's trying to say in regards to empathy. So we'll go to the next slide, please. So the first one, rejoice with those who rejoice, and weep with those who weep. So rejoice, in the Old Testament at least, when they use rejoice, I recognize that Romans is from the New Testament, but I really like the Hebrew for rejoice. It means to literally dance for joy, which means that you're so full of joy, it's overflowing, right? And so you're so happy, you're just jumping. It's like, I guess to go back to the dog, right? When a dog gets so excited that you come home, they don't know what to do with themselves, right? They're just running back and forth, and they're doing circles, and they're just so excited. That's rejoice. So to rejoice with those who rejoice means that empathy doesn't only happen in sadness. Empathy doesn't only happen when somebody's going through a hard time. It also should and can happen when they're happy. And if we are truly empathizing with those that we love, then we're going to celebrate all their victories. We're going to want those things to happen for them, and we're going to be equally as happy for them when they do. We're going to, it's my mom, when I get an award, even if it's the most improved award, my mom's way more excited than I am. And that happens more often than not, unfortunately. So to fully be so grateful for somebody's experiences that you rejoice with them, but then also to weep with those who weep. Watched Star is Born yesterday, and I don't know if they were weeping on the stage or on the screen, but I was weeping with them. So it's an emotional movie. It's really powerful, and the reason that I appreciate cinema is because it allows you to really dig into empathy. If you allow yourself to walk with that, when it's done right, when the acting is done well, and the cinematography is really good, like in that movie, then you can really put yourself in their shoes, and you can understand the characters as they go through it. And so that's kind of where this verse comes from. So the next one. So whatever you wish that others would do, not the next slide, just the next verse, sorry. So whatever you wish that others would do to you, do also to them. For this is the law and the prophets. Who likes to be heard in here? Chad does. We know that. Okay, so there's like 3 of you who like to be heard. So for the rest of you, don't worry about this verse. But for the 3 of you who do like to be heard, if you like to be heard, then obviously it's important to be able to hear others too, right? Our loved ones in our life typically like to be heard. Have unity of mind, sympathy, brotherly love, a tender heart, and a humble mind. It takes a tender heart to empathize with somebody. If you're hardened, how can you put yourself in their shoes? If you're prideful, how can it be a selfless act? Empathy is a selfless act. It's one of the most selfless acts to say, you know what, it doesn't matter what I'm dealing with today. It doesn't matter who's texting me right now. It doesn't matter if all my Instagram is blowing up right now. If Chad's sending me 12 text messages about life, I don't know. That always matters. But my point is, right, is that my life isn't what's important right now. It's what you're going through. So let me just take my deep breath, put those things aside. Remove judgment is a big deal, right? And completely humble myself to say, this time isn't about me. This time is about you. We live in a very egocentric world. We live in a world that says, what do I get from this? What do I benefit from whatever I'm doing right now? We need to try and remove that, right? Or if we're thinking that, then our benefit should be, how can I best support this person so that the greatest benefit that comes from this is that they do feel heard, that they feel appreciated, that they feel this sense of belonging. But yeah, it takes that tender heart and that humble mind. And this is, do nothing from rivalry or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. And I think that ties into what I was just saying. Put yourself down. If you're going to walk like Christ, right, then we need to be the last in order to serve those. So on the next slide, Now we go into 1 Corinthians and says, if one member suffers, all suffer together. If one member is honored, all rejoice together. And that, to me, talks about the congregation, right? If one member of our congregation, of our family here, is celebrating something, or if they're hurting, then that's all of us, right? We're all one family under Christ. And I think that's a big deal too. Hebrews 13:3 says, remember those who are in prison as though in prison with them, and those who are mistreated, since you are also in the body. I actually worked in a confinement facility for a year with the Army, and I was the behavioral health technician there. And so I got there, I was like fresh out of technical school, which means I'm just like brand new to the Army, just done with my training, like super excited to just take on the world. And they're like, all right, you're going to Korea. I'm like, okay, cool. I just spent 2 years there teaching English. I know Korea. And then it was like, okay, you're going to this place called Usaka K. Like, if you know anything about the Army, there's, your unit usually has like a number in front of it, and then you can look it up and all of that. But that was just all letters. And I was like, okay, cool, yeah, I'm going to Usaka K. All right, right on. And so I get there, and they're like, yeah, that's the prison. I'm going to prison. Okay, cool. Very good. I'll spend the next year in prison. That's what I wanted. Signed up to fight for freedom, and they put me in prison. So that's where I went, and for a year, I worked with inmates, and I was the behavioral health I was in charge of the entire facility. And when a new inmate would come in, regardless of the time of night, I would go and I would have to sit down with them and check in on them, make sure that they're not going to be a harm for self or others. But I also had to empathize with them, and I had to say, you know what, like, we all have a past. We all been through things that have led to where we're at now. And I'm not here to judge what you've done, but I'm here to support you and to try and get you to a better place moving forward. That can be really hard if you're talking to somebody who has done things that you really don't approve of. I have a few triggers that I really had to work through in that time. And I'm in this small little brick office, probably the size of like right here. And the bricks were definitely hard enough that if I wanted to make any long-lasting impact on those individuals, I definitely could have. But my hope was to make a different kind of long-lasting impact and to show them that they still have a future. And that was not always easy. But it was a really good growing experience and learning experience for me, because I would have to hear their whole story. From childhood till now, what led them to where they're at, and had to listen for remorse, which usually there was remorse there. There are a few people who psychologically they can't really process the feeling of remorse and guilt, and so that was a little harder for me to work through. But then it also says, and those who are mistreated. And I have got a bleeding heart for people who are mistreated, and so that one really speaks to me. So it says, since you are also in the body. So we're also sinners. We're also falling short. And if you don't believe that, if you don't believe that you have issues or that you think that you're in this level of perfection, it's going to be really hard for you to serve somebody who's making a mistake or who's walking down the wrong path right now. But if you can recognize your own flaws, it honestly makes you more humble and more capable to empathize with people, to say, you know what, yeah, you're in a dark place right now, but I've also been in dark places, or I'm currently in dark places. That's a good thing to be able to do, to humble yourself to do something like that. The next one we've seen a million times, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. That last word, is that easy? Especially if you're in one of those seasons. But again, I said it earlier, you can't love others until you've loved yourself. You can't empathize with others until you understand where you're at right now and until you're processing some of that stuff. So the next slide kind of goes through, this is one of my favorite sections of the Bible, 1 John 3 and 4, and so I'll kind of walk through some of that, threw in some John 15 in the middle, but there's a lot of good stuff in 1 John 3 and 4, so I really encourage you to just dig into it, but it says, by this we know love, that he laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for the brothers. this is how we know love. This is how we know empathy. If when you really want to think about who has best shown an example of empathy, I mean, it doesn't come from anywhere but Christ, right? God's like, oh, okay, you guys are hurting. What should I do? Let me send my son to go and feel exactly what you're feeling. Who, in essence, is God as well, right? So God is in our pain because he came down and he experienced that pain. He walked in our shoes. That's beautiful, right? Like, that's an incredible story of empathy. And it says, but if anyone has the world's goods and sees his brother in need, yet closes his heart against him, how does God's love abide in him? We don't talk about that one as much. Anyone has the world's goods and sees his brother in need, yet closes his heart against him, how does God's love abide in him? That one's a little harder to swallow. Then John 15:12 says, this is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you, through that process, right, of sending his son. And then we get into 1 John 4, and this is where it gets really fun and really interesting. So it says, this is how God showed his love among us. He sent his one and only son into the world that we might live through him, right? It's not just living because we think we know what he looks like, or what he might do, but living through him, right? That real sense of diving into something, that true essence of empathy is to live through somebody. And then verse 16 says that God is love, and whoever lives in love lives in God, and God in them. God is love. God is empathy. If you're going to love somebody, you have to empathize with somebody. Those two go hand in hand. If you're going to empathize with somebody, you're loving them. God is love. In other words, God is empathy. And if you want to live in God, if you want to live in that presence, then you have to be able to do that, right? And this is how, this is why it's so important to me, is when I look at verses like this. If I want to walk the life of a Christian, I have to understand this. I have to understand that it's not a life of judgment, that it's not a life of condemning people, but it's a life of God. It's a life of love. Whoever lives in love or lives in that empathy lives in God, and then God's right there with you, and that's so beautiful. And then what's even more cool is that there's no fear in love, because perfect love drives out fear. Sometimes I feel as though we get really nervous when somebody is in front of us and they're really hurting, because we like, oh my gosh, like, I have to say the right things. What do I say? What do I say? What do I say? That can get in the way of actually just taking in the moment, of actually just hearing what they're processing. A lot of research says that a lot of the things that we say in those times are actually more hurtful and less helpful, because we're digging for the right words, and that's not always what they want. We're looking for the solution. That's not always what we need. Sometimes we just need to be heard. And if you truly empathize with somebody, if you put yourself in their shoes, you're going to know the questions that they might want to hear, because it's the things you might want to hear if you were in their position. You're going to know the words to give them because they're things that you probably would like to receive in that moment. So now it's not a guessing game. Now it's not a game of, which of the 3 go-to phrases that I've got should I use for this one? You know, everything's going to be okay. In all seasons, right? God's going to get you through it. Can do all things. Just kidding. That was a good one. So I don't want to take his whole sermon away from him. For those who missed a couple weeks ago with Frank. Can do all things through Christ who gives us strength. That's a good verse. But that's not always the right answer. My go-to is that Kelly Clarkson always taught me, what doesn't kill me makes me stronger, right? But we all have our own thing. That one does always work, so feel free, you're welcome. I won't even charge extra for that. But we don't always need to have the right answers. And I think that's that takes a burden off of you. When people come to you, they don't expect that you're going to know what God wants from their lives. A lot of times they just need to be heard. They need to be empathized with, because that gives us a sense of purpose. That gives us a sense of identity. So the next slide shows, this is my depiction of, so the word empathy actually comes from the German word Einfühlung, and Einfühlung, I don't know if I'm even close to the right pronunciation, but Ein meaning one, Fühlung meaning heart. I don't know what Fühlung means. Not German. Actually, I probably am. I'm a little of everything. So the word's really cool because what it means is the person who decided upon Einfühlung as the meaning for empathy, the reason they did is because they were recognizing that people were having a hard time interpreting art, actually. And so what they wanted to encourage people is to put themselves in that piece of art. We were at Second Saturday last night. There were a few pieces of art I just couldn't put myself in. Like, I was just, no, that's not going to happen. I'm going to have to keep moving on. That's too weird, right? But sometimes when you're looking at it and you're taking it in, you're like, okay, I don't know exactly what they're telling me, but if I put myself in this story, if I put myself in this piece of art, then I can at least have a better understanding of how it's impacting me. That's where it comes from. So I believe that empathy is not only a superpower, but I believe it's also an art form. And so the person who is presenting with their issues or with their joys, if I want to empathize with them, so that person is doing the artwork. They are the piece of art. And if I want to invest in them and I want to put myself in their shoes, then I have to do the heart work, right? So in order to really just invest, to just pour in, I have to be open to allowing my heart to say, you know what, it's not about me, it's about them. How can I get into that piece of art to really invest, right? So it's the heart work. But then the next slide also shows that I believe that love without empathy is empty. I don't think that you can love somebody, truly love somebody, without empathizing for them and with them. If anybody disagrees with me, we can have a talk afterward, and Chad will buy you coffee. But I don't think that you can do it. I don't think that you can walk with somebody side by side and say, I'm here to support you, but not empathize with them. That's why this is so important, and that's why I think that I'm so passionate about it. So, talked a lot about what is empathy, where does it come from, things like that. But then the next slide says, how do you do it? How do I do it? Well, I'm not married, so I probably am not authorized to teach you how to do it. Thanks, Chad. Different definition, empathy. Whoops. Okay, how do I empathize with other people? That's a better question, so I'm going to focus on that one. There's some processes. There's a lot of different research out there on how to empathize with other people. And this next slide this is sort of my understanding after I took some of the research out and just kind of took some of my own real life to figure out, if you do nothing else, you focus on these three things right here, I think you're going to have a really good foundation for empathizing with people. And so I'll break them down each in a minute, but if you are empathizing with somebody and you're not bringing in your own experience, then it's going to be a little harder for you. And it's not to say you tell them, oh, I've been there before, or I've done that before, because a lot of times that's definitely not what they want to hear, because everybody's pain is different, everybody's struggle is different. But if you bring in your experience to understand what they might be walking through, like, for example, loneliness is a true, deep-rooted emotion. And they might be talking about loneliness. They might give it a different label. It might be a very different type of loneliness, than what you've experienced, but it's still loneliness, and you understand what that feels like, and you can use that experience to help guide some of the things that you might talk to them about. Presence. Again, we'll get more into these, but presence, just the ability to just be there. You know, the whole getting rid of all the distractions Chad's been talking about, and turning off the mechanism. Is that what it was? Yeah. To just be present. We're not very good at that. I'm not very good at that sometimes, but being present. And then questions. Open-ended, true, genuine, empathic questions. People always try to argue with me, empathic, don't you mean empathetic? It's the same thing. So yes, I do. I do mean empathetic and empathic. So questions is kind of the third piece, just the conversation, how you keep it rolling, and how you keep it moving. So I think those three are what creates empathy. So let's look a little bit about presence. So the next slide, this is just kind of an idea of what it means to walk alongside somebody and to just be there. When's the last time you just, you know what, slide my phone off to the side, you and me, eye contact? How powerful is eye contact, especially in our society today? Super powerful. There are people who will have full meals without making one little brief moment of eye contact. And that makes me so sad, right? But I don't think you can truly empathize with somebody if you're not looking into their eyes. I think that that's one of the biggest storytellers that anybody has. And I think that that's where it starts for you too. Because if they're looking at you and they don't see this mirrored image of the emotions and the feelings that they're experiencing, they're going to feel a disconnect. Whether they realize it or not, they're feeling that disconnect. I don't know if you've ever been talking to somebody where they're looking at you, but they're not looking at you. Almost like probably 50% of my conversations with Chad is just like, he's looking straight through to the back of my head, reading his text messages. It's not true. That's not true. But there are times where, and like he had mentioned, he's like, sometimes I have to stop and say, you know what, I'm sorry. Totally was in a different place right there in that conversation. Like, can we rewind and go through that? And I respect that a lot because it says, you know what, like, I care enough to address it. I care enough to apologize and to try and dive into this time together. So, presence and being there for somebody. And then the next slide, our experiences. We all struggle. We've all had our own background and our own experiences and our own pains. And those all look different for all people. And so we need to use those to our benefit when we're talking to people. We need to use that as one of our greatest tools in our tool belt is our background. We all have one. And the next slide is just like when you're with people and you have this desire to talk to them, you have to be able to use open-ended questions. If you just ask them like, oh, did that make you sad? Mm-hmm, sure did. That's why I'm crying. Okay, cool. Like, when you're sad, do you like not sleep very well? That's pretty true. Okay, cool. That conversation's not going to last very long, right? Open-ended questions is going to be your best friend. And so the next couple of slides, I've kind of got some things that are helpful tools to just provide for you, just little snippets of things that we use in the counseling world to help people discuss, to help people open up a little bit more. And so it's really helpful to just acknowledge their pain. Like, I am so sorry to hear the things that you're going through. That must be terrible. Tell me more about that. That's powerful because it shows that, like, I'm not looking to give you the answers, but I'm looking to hear you. I'm looking to be with you in this moment. Share how you feel. Like I said, if you've experienced the same pain before, don't tell them you've experienced it, but ask them a question that shows that maybe you understand that. Like, when you're in that moment, does it ever feel like nobody else even cares? If you ask them a question like that, like, wow, yeah, that person gets me. I want to open up more to this person. Show gratitude for them sharing. This is a big one. If somebody has opened up to you for the first time, they've never opened up to somebody else, and you don't show them gratitude for sharing, they might not share again. Thank you for sharing. That must have been really hard. But I'm so glad that you shared that with me. It shows that you trust me. And I know that that's a big deal, so thank you for that. The next slide, show interest. Tell me more about whatever it is that we're talking about. I want to know more. I'm so interested to be here and to walk through this story with you. Tell me more about that. That's a good go-to. It's a lot better than the Kelly Clarkson line. Be encouraging. I'm not always the best cheerleader, even if I like to think so. I used to learn the cheers when I was on the football field, and just get in the water, and then they start cheering. I always wanted to actually be aggressive, right? But I never did it. I got too scared. But be supportive and be encouraging, right? So it's inspiring to me that you are going through this much, and somehow you are still able to share with me. Somehow you still got up today. Somehow you're still feeding yourself, right? Find those little strengths. Find things to say, you know what, I'm really proud of you, that you're still pushing, that you're still taking that left foot in front of your right. Be supportive. We good? That was weird. All right, be supportive, right? What can I do for you? You just shared a lot of things with me, and I want to know how I can continue to be there for you and continue to support you. So this next slide, this is going to be another time for you guys to share, because I don't think we can empathize with people if we don't practice it. So this is what I want to do. So taking off your shoes to put on somebody else's looks like saying, it's not about me, right? We've talked about that. But also, if you were to look around this room right now, you would probably see everybody kind of seems to, have their stuff together. That's really cool. I wish I had my stuff together like all these other people. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask a question, and if it applies to you, I just want you to stand up. If you've ever experienced this in your life, it doesn't have to be right now, but if you've ever experienced it, I just want you to stand up. So we're going to do a few different questions. So get your, if you need to give yourself a little massage on the quads to loosen up, feel free. And then Jake and Chad, you guys have mics. That's great. So if this has ever applied to you at any point in your life, please stand up. The question is, have you ever felt lost? Any point in your life, have you ever felt lost? Please stand up. Now look around the room. I don't know why any of you have ever felt lost. I don't have the answers. I don't know your stories. But I know that every single one of you at some point in your life has felt lost. Is there anyone who's willing to share, just briefly, one of the times that they're thinking about right now? Chad. Thank you.
When I lost my husband 2 years ago, of 34 years.
When you lost your husband 2 years ago, 34 years, you felt lonely, felt lost. Anybody else want to share a moment when you felt lost? Thank you so much for sharing that.
After divorce, after 8 years of marriage.
A divorce after 8 years of marriage. Thank you. Felt lost. Go ahead and take your seats. I'm going to ask another one. At any point in your life, did you ever feel like there was nobody in your life who could hear you, who really was there to listen to you and to be there for you? Go ahead and stand up if that applies to you. Any point in your life. Doesn't have to be right now. Look around the room. Again, you don't know anybody's story. You don't know when they felt that way. But you know that they did. How does that feel, right? Put yourself in those people's shoes. How does that feel? Is there anybody willing to share their story? It's okay. We don't have to. Thank you. Go ahead and sit down. I could continue to do that, and we could continue to look around. But I hope you recognize the power of what just happened. I don't know if any of you have ever, thanks Jake, you can sit down. I don't know if any of you have ever sat down and intentionally done life stories with somebody, but I have, and it's hands down one of my favorite things to do. See, people ask me sometimes, like, how did you know what to say? How did you know what I was feeling? Well, a lot of it comes from the fact that I've heard people's stories or I've lived through some of those stories. I care enough about the people in my life to say, you know what, I don't know anything about where you come from, but I want to know. Start to now, very beginning to where you're at right now. I want to know what you've been through. I want to know all the hard stuff, but I also want to know all the good stuff. That's where I get a chance to really invest into people and say, I have so much better understanding of who you are as a whole person. There might be people in your life that you feel close to, but do you know their whole story? If there are people in your life that you know are going through some things, that are hurting, that are in pain, you have to take your shoe off in order to put theirs on. But I challenge you to look at those closest relationships with you and say, how much about this person do I really know? How much about their walk do I really know? I know the things that we have in common that we talk about frequently, whether it's church or sports, work. I know those things about them. But what else do I know? Maybe they've never had somebody hear who they are. Maybe they've never had anybody hear what they've been through. And that's a lonely place to be. It's a really hard thing to not have somebody hear you, to not have somebody support you, to not have somebody love you. So that's my challenge to all of us, is to look at our relationships, the people that we love, and say, how can I be more present in their lives? What do I know about them, and what do I feel like I'm missing? What have I missed? And if you're not feeling like you're heard, reach out to somebody in this room. Say, hey, you know what? I could use a coffee. I could use a lunch. There's a lot of power in being truly present with somebody. There's a lot of power in saying, I don't know what you're going through or what you've been through, but I want to know. I care to know because I love you. Empathy is one of the greatest superpowers. And it's one that if you really invest in it, it's going to be even better than being able to make guacamole out of anything, which is a stretch, but I have faith. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.